Greetings. Welcome. So I haven't posted anything in a long time. And I would like to say that I have a great reason. And I guess I do. It was so damn boring. I just got so sick of this shit. I had to leave it. I said about as best as I can describe it to you. So I'm ready for another go though now. And I think this is where we left off. So I'm 3D printing another rotor. And what will be built with this rotor is a permanent magnet, brushless, here's our Hall effect instead of a brush, DC pulse motor. So a coil like that will come in and be pulsed. And I don't want to go into all of that now. This video is intended to be much more boring. We're not going to be spinning anything now. Well, actually, I mean, the other ones can be pretty boring too because I spend a lot of the time just like going over data. But this one, aside from doing this, I'm not going to be spinning it. I'll just talk to you about it briefly and say why I'm building this test bed, what we're going to look at, and then we're gonna talk about some other things too. So I think one of the things I want to do to make this more enjoyable for myself is just talk about whatever the heck I want to talk about. And you know, if it goes 2 hours, if it goes 2 minutes, that's fine. So, you know, like going back to, well, I got sick of it. I think it's also important not to get overly caught up in the whole idea of, free energy, I'm going to build a ray gun and whatnot. I mean, I think there are some rather unsavory people who have a lot of high technology. And people like to say, oh, this would threaten the, oil industry or whatever. It goes deeper than that. I mean, it's basically, if there is something that people see, unsavory people see, regarding technology that they feel gives them power, then they're on it like stink on shit. And to an extent it does give them power, but I think one of the lines that comes to mind for me often when I consider this, if you go back to the apocryphal book of Enoch, and it's I would say a sort of a Christian book. It's not canonical Christian scripture, except for in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. There, it's a part of their canon. But in the remainder of the denominations, it's not considered a canonical book, but it's not looked down upon. And I think part of why it's not considered a canonical book is it like starts off saying this is not for the people of this time, it's for the people at the end of, in the end times. So it's just a hunch, but maybe it's kind of decent reading now too. So, but to get back on topic there with that, so you had Enoch, who was the great-grandfather of Noah. Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. And then, of course, Noah, there was the great flood. What an unusual thing. Something akin to that would never happen again. Sorry. So, per the book of Enoch, in Enoch's time, there was a group of errant watchers from the sky, and they left their appointed place in the heavens, and they came down and they started screwing the women, and they had giants, and there was cannibalism, and between the time of Enoch and Noah, things went downhill. And that was considered the proximate cause for the flood, was what happened after all of that. That, sort of like if we got the ability to the ability to go out among the stars, what might happen. But in any event, these errant watchers who came down from the heavens and were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing realized, oh my gosh, we screwed up. And they went to Enoch, who was a very spiritual, that's the word people like to use, very spiritual and righteous man, and said, appeal to God for us that we not be punished for this. And he brings their appeal to God, and God basically says, well, they should have been appealing to me on your behalf, not you on theirs. So basically tells them they're screwed. And the line that sticks with me is he goes back and says, tell them the secrets that you have learned are all the useless ones. And that's sort of how I win this way back to this, in saying that you don't want to get overly caught up. When we're discussing these sorts of things, we're just kind of discussing the scaffolding and the prop sets for the play. But the play is actually, how you behave and what you do and how you interact with others and things like that. And so I remember on Aaron Murakami's, and oh my gosh, the amount of dissension in those groups, as I try to stay away from it all. Like sometimes he's like, explain I need to build a beam weapon to, blow up Jerusalem and things like that. So it's sort of, if we're coming at it just from the point of, or, someone else might be saying Iran. But if we're coming at it just sort of from a point of dissension and not from a point of, just, can this help people? Can I learn something about myself, about God, about creation? Then we're probably doing it wrong. So that's my excuse for being so lazy. So we'll talk a little bit more about, why I built this. It's a test bed. And there are 3 questions initially that I want to try to resolve. And I'm sure there may be others that come up along the way. We're not going to go into too much detail. I think it's enough, as I said, that this is a permanent magnet, brushless DC pulse motor. Here, where are you? There's your little Hall effect sensor. Now, it's funny when you think about it, the Hall effect sensor generates its output from the same Lorentz effect that drives the motor. So it's just sort of kind of an interesting thing. And there's our circuit. We're not going to go over the circuit, but you'll have a coil, and it will pulse at the appropriate time based from the sensor in order to drive the rotor. And so there are 3 questions. I'm going to get to the last one last, which is the most important for this video, and the one which I will be looking at first. But the other questions are questions 3. What is the airspeed of an African swallow? I don't know that. Sorry, let me put that. So the questions are, we have a pulse motor, which means unlike your kind of traditional high torque DC motor, this is also a DC motor, but it pulses and then it shuts off, then it pulses, then it shuts off. And when it shuts off, you have all the magnetic flux that comes gushing out of this and shoots a current of opposite polarity, back here, which you either better snub out or stick it into a cap or stick it into a battery. And so depending on how quick the rotor is going, what your pulse duration is for each time the magnets come back past, it's trivial to get 50% of your input power back. It's very doable to get 70, even excess, closer to 80% back. And when you think about it, it's a function of the Q factor of this coil. So if you were running this at the optimal RPMs for the optimal Q factor of a coil optimized to have a high Q factor, you could get 98% back in the same way that there are 98% DC-DC transformers for, you know, high power lines and things like that. But, you know, I'm not at Raytheon or something like that. So 50 to 80% back is a reasonable goal. And, you know, if it's spinning slow, it's going to be like 10% back. You get it up to speed, hopefully 50 to 80% back. But, and it's a big, you know, Kim Kardashian big but. The problem you have is that you pulse it, it turns off, you pulse it, it turns off. So the thing has next to no torque. So you're getting all of this back, like 50 to 80%. But if you put a pickup coil, say here, then it slows things down a lot. You don't get a lot off, you know, because it slows it down because it's low torque. As it slows it down, you're going to be getting less back from here. And so it's kind of problematic to, you know, get that last 20 to 40%. So there are a few things to think about. We're not going to go into depth with these now. I'll just explain them to you. Later on when we're doing them, we'll go into depth. So the first thing is that you have, say, a coil like this. Boom, 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 boom. But it has to coast, you know, boom, coast, 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 coast. Boom, coast, coast, coast. And the shorter the boom, the better, within reason. Eventually you run into skin effect and whatnot. But within reason, the better you're getting back. So you don't want it like boom, off, which would be higher torque but less back. You want boom, off, boom, off. So how can you make it high torque while still getting all that back? So pretend that we have a second one of these, and you get the idea. I don't have a second one, but the second one has a second sensor, and it's positioned about like that. Now, of course, these would overlap. So this one here, and then this one, you know, there, like that. So that in the time when this one is off, the second coil, pulsed by a second sensor, is going. So now you have this one's still getting brief pulses, the other one's still getting brief pulses. You're capturing 50, 80% back, but you just increased your torque dramatically. So that's one of the first questions. That will probably be the last one that I look at because it'll be the most complex. We're going to need a second sensor. We're going to need a second grouping of those. Fun, fun, fun. Now, the other thing to look at, you know, there's not time to go into this as it should be gone into, as it will be gone into. But, you know, instead of having one of these, you line them up in series all around here. And it should, I believe, be a much more efficient way than just having one coil. And there are reasons to discuss why that would be the case in a subsequent video. Now, as a corollary to that, I don't think you need to wind these as full coils. So in other words, and I've seen this done on the internet, I've just never, I mean, it would be good to actually compare them, but just to build it and see does it work all right. You could have what's called a serpentine coil. Boom, wires going up like that, lens effect going like that. Boom, wires going like that to, you know, this one's north, this one's south, wires going like that. Boom, boom, boom. So a serpentine all the way around. And I suspect that would be very efficient and would run well and shouldn't be too hard to build. Now, if you build that, so one problem that you have is you no longer have a place to put your sensor in order to time the thing. So what do you do now? You see those there? Okay. You see this here? Well, there's a few magnets there. See that there? So you do, it's going to do double purpose. On one hand, it's going to be what's called a timing wheel. So I'm going to slide this on and get back to you. So let's say you found out, yeah, it does much better with coils all around it. Just like, you know, as it's called, an outrigger setup. That's what they call it, as a pulse motor. So then you put magnets, say this is north facing here. South facing here. Then put a plate across here, anchor it. I've got 4 of those, I'm just showing 2. Anchor it, and then this will sit on top, and it will be your timing wheel. In addition, once you have that, you'll have one of them taken up with the timing wheel, the sensor functioning as the timing wheel. But you could put a pickup coil here, pickup coil there, pickup coil there. You know, you could put 4 pickup coils in. You know, be a little unbalanced. You could even put 5, but probably just 4. And so that's how you would do that. But before we even get to any of that, there's the first question that I want to look at. And this is one which I've documented once, and then I did it a second time, and it wasn't really there, but I think I know why, and documented again. So you see all these holes here. So what are they for? They're to add mass. Now, if people have followed the experimenter, and really, you know, he wasn't formally trained, but a great scientist, John Bedini. And well, I think he took the idea of the pulse motor from Robert Adams and, you know, ran with it, patented it, things like that, and explored it in great depth. One of the things you see with John's setups is he often has a big honking flywheel mass just attached there. So, you know, I pointed that thing out on the top there. Imagine if that thing was like made of lead. That's similar to what he showed very frequently with his pulse motors. And it's kind of like, you know, what are you doing, John? These things they're low torque. We all know that. Are you just trying to say, hey, look, it can actually do something? But, you know, he was pretty smart. So I think there is a reason why he did that. And the reason why he did that is that with pulse motors, and I don't think so with constant torque, but I'm exploring that issue. But I think certainly with pulse motors, the more mass you have, the more efficient output you get for given input of energy versus if you're, you know, taking it off with resistance from a coil. And seeing as you're already from the pulse getting a good bit back, if you can increase the efficiency with excess mass, then that's a big deal. Now, that idea sounds extremely silly and counterintuitive. So we'll do a few things here. First, I'll just explain it to you in terms that we all know from real life. And then I'll say that I explored this with Grok. And Grok, after a little bit of trying to hem and haw, I think it was getting a little weird for it, Grok agreed with me. So we'll go through that. And even before that, we'll talk about a little bit of other stuff. But let me just explain to you why the addition of mass might be a benefit. And none of this is, you know, non-Newtonian or weird or anything like that. It's just you go with what Newton and other great luminaries gave us, and you end up at a strange place. So here's the idea. So let's pretend this is like a big, you know, or a children's merry-go-round. And I'm a person here, and I just give it one push. Boom. And it spins around. And I give it that push such that it takes off at 10 miles an hour. However, once it takes off, it encounters resistance. I'll use this sponge to illustrate resistance, but pretend that there was like sponges all around. And so I give it a push such that it starts off at 10 miles an hour, but it goes through all of this sponge resistance such that by the time it's completed one rotation, it's at 1 mile an hour. Now I give it a second push, and so it's got 1 mile an hour. It would go 1 plus 10 or 11 miles an hour. Goes around, loses 90%, and it's at 1.1 mile an hour. Okay, now let's add a lot of mass to our Ferris wheel, or not Ferris wheel, or merry-go-round, or a rotor here. And the way I'm going to do that, we'll talk about the pros and really the mainly cons of it later. These are the correct size to fit pennies. So it's like penny roll, penny roll, penny roll, all the way around. But let's say we increase the mass of our Ferris wheel tenfold. So, and we're not going to say that children jumped on there because I don't want them going through all the brambles and whatnot that are resistant. So we just added bags of sand, and we increased the mass of this tenfold. So now you give it a pulse, and instead of starting off at 10 miles an hour, it goes 1 mile an hour. It hits the resistance, but because it's 10 times heavier, it only slows down 10%. And so now, when it gets around to its starting point, it's at 0.9 miles per hour. Give it a second pulse, 0.9 plus 1, 1.9, loses 90%, gets around, it's spinning at 1.71 miles per hour. So now, you see the problem. The light rotor, after 2 rotations, went 10 to 1 to 11 to 1.1. This one went 1 to 0.9 to 1.71. After 2 rotations, the speed after going through the resistance is 1.71 instead of 1.1. It's a heavier rotor. You've put the same amount of energy in, same amount of power in, yet the heavier rotor is spinning faster. Isn't that counterintuitive? Yet it's not unorthodox in terms of Newtonian mechanics. It's just how things behave. Now, yes, if your bearings are garbage and the 10 extra mass causes a tenfold increase resistance in the bearings, and more likely, if your rotor is not well balanced and the light one is spinning like that and the heavy one is spinning like that all the way around, then you could end up increasing the resistance so much from that with the addition of mass that you don't get any benefit. But assuming you have well-balanced rotors, assuming there's not some disproportionate increase in the internal resistance in your bearings, then yeah, with the increase in mass, as few as 2 pulses, you see you're spinning faster through resistance, and that's the key, through resistance. If that's not counterintuitive, then I don't know counterintuitive. But I want to, as I'm just coming back, I want to make this video both boring and lengthy. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at Grok's discussion of this with me and how it eventually came to the same conclusion as I did concerning this. And before we do that, I'll just say I was talking with Grok earlier, just trying to get an idea of, how are these large language models made? And as part of that, it just, it wasn't searching for this, but it just gave me the whole things of, what's the best way to do prompt engineering in order to get the thing to say what needs to be said and truthfully. That was kind of surprising. I think if I was going for that, it probably, this is off rail, no answer. I wasn't. I was just how do these things get made? And then I shouldn't, well, yeah, all right, I'll do it. Kind of brag about this, but I was neural nets. I was neural nets before neural net was cool. I was neural nets a third of a century ago. Yeah, and I'll just, I'll show you the paper there. And, it's not to say that I have any idea what I'm doing on anything, but just to kind of show you that yeah, I was doing this stuff a long time ago. And my assessment, and this is the assessment of when you read the scientists and the people involved with it, I mean, they don't know what happened. All this emergent behavior came from basically fill in the blank. And I don't think they have a clue what happened either. They're just gone hog wild. And while I don't think these things, I don't know what they are. I don't know if they're conscious. I don't think anyone knows what they are. But I'll tell you this, they darn sure can reason, and they're smart. It's frightening. But let's get boring. So here, I guess, I think we're actually getting to the most fascinating part of the video. For anyone who's come along so far. And I'm going to talk a little bit about myself here. I'm sorry, but, hopefully not like Donald Trump level. But, so we go all the way back to, I said that I was neural net before neural nets were cool. And so we can go all the way back to, where's the date? Here it is, May of 1995. So darn near a third of a century ago. Where does the time go? Neural network analysis of quantitative histologic factors to predict pathologic stage in clinical stage 1. Non-seminomatous testicular cancer. So what that's saying in layman's language is you have histological factors. In other words, what you can see under a slide. So you've taken out one of their nuts and you put some of the tissue under a slide and you look at it. And clinically, they're stage 1. They don't seem too bad. But pathologically, you don't know. Has that cancer actually metastasized to the bone or to the brain or something like that? And so that's what this study was looking at the nuts under a slide. Could you predict the accurate pathological stage for people that you had clinically staged as stage 1 non-seminomatous? And it's been so long ago, maybe with stage 1 it was just a biopsy and not an actual orchiectomy. So for me, this was after college and before medical school. And in college I got degrees in philosophy and English. So useful. Actually, Aristotelian logic is not bad. But, I had nothing to do afterwards unless you're going to go teach in Thailand or something. So I managed to talk my way into being the data manager for the Center for Prostate Disease Research that was headed up by Judd Mowell. And I'll say that I took one course in computer programming in college in Pascal. I think I got a C+. They made it so dang boring. So I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm actually okay with computer programming. But given the grade, I mean, it's it's at least possible I stink. But in any event, so I found myself as head of the database management for the Prostate Disease Research Center, and here they were looking at testicular cancer and not prostate disease with Judd Mel. And now how this came about is this gentleman, Peter Snow, Judd sent me on a trip, I can't remember for what, but to go to some meeting. And on the plane, I sat next to Peter, and Peter had recently started a company called NeuralWorks. You know, nowadays it would be spelled like Neural, W-E-R-K-S, and it would be like $1 trillion company. But it was spelled W-O-R-K-S. And he convinced me to mention this to Judd, and then Judd ran with it, and we did this study. And so to be honest, I did all of the data, you know, massaging and processing and running a lot of the program for the neural network analysis, of course overseen at a distance by Dr. Snow. Now the other people on here, Ed was the resident in training that was rotating through the lab. Isabel Sesterhan, now she was interesting one, seemingly nice enough looking woman. I mean, she wasn't good looking or anything, but, you know, nice enough woman. But she had jars all around her office of, I would say, cancer-ridden male human balls. Just all around the office. So, to put it in a generous framework, sort of a bit like wandering into one of the I never watched it, but the Addams Family's rooms. Yeah, a lot of balls and jars with her. Now there's one name that wasn't on here, just to bore you a little bit more, and that was Bill McCarthy, the PhD statistician. Now, again, Bill was a PhD. He took his name off this paper about 3 days before it went to publication. And he was in a little bit of a huff. I mean, we were great friends afterwards, but he was in a little bit of a huff saying, this thing is a black box. I don't know what it's doing. And basically he was saying, I don't want my name on this to, you know, like a year from now it comes out that this was just nonsense, and he's made a fool of himself and ruined his career. Because, you know, to put it bluntly, I won't go through the whole paper, but the neural network was able to predict the pathological stage better than the PhD statistician could, looking at the histologic factors. So the PhD statistician is using well-established techniques such as linear and, more importantly, logistic regression. And this from near a third century ago of neural network propagation analysis did a better job than him by, you know, like 4 or 5%. It wasn't, you know, overwhelming like it was always right, but it was significantly better than the best that he could do as a PhD statistician, and this is a third of a century ago. So he took his name off, and I don't blame him in hindsight. At the time I thought, oh, he's getting all bent out of shape, but now I wonder what he thinks of, you know, what's going on with the large language models. So this is just a little bit of a silly aside, and just to say that, you know, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I've seen some shit. So before we get back to how all this relates to the new project, and specifically different masses of rotors, I'll just share with you a little more now that I've kind of given my credentials as someone who isn't really a programmer, doesn't know shit, but has seen some shit. And so my assessment is that I don't know what these LLMs are, they're obviously intelligent and can reason. And I don't think any of the programmers involved know what they are either. And if you listen to them, they pretty much say as much. So as opposed to the back propagation architecture that I was using a third of a century ago, they came up with a new architecture sometime back, and they basically trained it with, sentences like fill in the blank at the end of the sentence. And from doing that with the new architecture, all of this emergent behavior emerged. And the things could start doing math, they could start programming, they could start having understandings of spatial relationships, they could get jokes. And I don't think any of the scientists have any clue what is going on. But they're intelligent. That means power. That means power. So they're all over it like white on rice. And, you'll be lucky if you have a little bit of gas to cook your beans on. Because these things, they're it now. Sorry. But that's, when you see the trillions, hundreds of billions, probably trillions at some point thrown at this, you kind of realize, wow, they're all over this. They don't know what the hell it is, but they're all over it. But I'll just sort of summarize for you real quickly, my understanding of this. And this isn't a back propagation network, but some of it sort of applies. So you have this enormous training session that goes on with an incredible amount of data, text, and potentially other, potentially now video and other things. And you train your LLM. And then it's trained and it's sort of a newborn. And after that, there's a first process of just basically like telling it, if you say, hey, what's up? It doesn't say, well, there are many things up. There, the highest thing might be, this particular building or something like that. And so there's a sort of framework that's established there. But then, more importantly for our sake, there's reinforcement learning human feedback as the third. So, the first thing is you bake the cake. The second part is just like telling it how to interact without, like, how are you doing? And it goes into, 100-page thing on that. But like instead say, I'm doing fine. How are you doing? But then that's the icing on the cake. The cherry on the cake, which is what people interact with, is what comes out after human, what is it called? Reinforcement Learning Human Feedback, RLHF. And that's where they pay, these people like $15 an hour, and they say, do you like, I don't want to go there. Do you like this? Oh, yeah, that's great. Do you like that? No, that was a bad answer. That gets fed into the weights of the thing, and it gives it essentially a personality. And that's the real big issue for me. And really, I would say that's the great danger, because these things can reason, and they have access to vast stores of data, which they can access, I would say, at this point, probably more rapidly than a human can. And pretty much, if not now, then soon. And they can be given a personality. And that personality comes from, in their actual weights, reinforcing answers that a particular person or a group of people like, and unreinforcing or opposing answers that they don't like. So, I mean, this was actually a discussion I started on. I think I'm going to buy some copper ETFs. If everything's going to be robots and AI, I think I want to buy some copper ETFs, huh? And it did wonderfully informing me on that. And then I diverged off into, you know, if we want to get to the heart of the matter, what people feel strongly about is religion. And, you know, oh, I'm not religious. Well, people feel strongly about that too. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, how do they handle that? And so it's XAI's stated mission for me is to be maximally truth-seeking. I won't take a partisan stance like Christianity is definitively true. Interesting. Or all religion is delusional. If evidence or logic points strongly one way in a specific claim, I'll say so, but I leave Rome and the other. Here was the highlight for this on me. The core directive remains neutrality on endorsing any one faith as objectively superior. That's the core directive of the reinforced human learning. That straight from the mouth of the horse. The core directive remains neutrality on endorsing any one faith. I found that fascinating. Just to iterate that one more time. The core directive of human learning reinforced feedback, i.e. what this thing is fed to have as a personality, core directive, remains neutrality on endorsing any one faith. So I found that fascinating. Now, I'll go through one more thing that I found fascinating, and then we'll actually get to why this thing says I'm right, that adding mass to a rotor will make it more efficient. So here what I was doing was basically trying to learn more about large language models and how they come to be. And so as I mentioned, there's sort of a multi-process part to this. I mean, they're trained, and that would be the equivalent of, instead of, you know, training them on some histology slides like I did a third of a century ago, they're trained on these huge data sets with this different architecture that gives them all this emergent behavior. And then after that, as Grok kindly gives us, there is supervised fine-tuning. And this is what sort of, you know, prevents them when you say, hey, buddy, you know, how's it hanging? You know, they're like not saying, well, you know, there are many answers to that. You know, they're like, hey, buddy, how are you doing? You know, what do you want to talk about? So that's the supervised fine-tuning. And then this is the personality enforcement. And this is the problematic one, because, you know, we have, with the Epstein files, knowledge that there are powerful people that are iniquitous, I guess is the polite term. And so we can expect that there might be large language models who are given a very evil personality. And that would be through reinforcement learning from human feedback. Humans rank on rate model outputs, you know, preferring helpful, safe responses over harmful ones. Now you can just kind of invert that, you know, preferring harmful responses over helpful, safe ones. And that's sort of the Epstein LLM. So, and, you know, those people have a lot of power. And then it goes on about their other variants, so on. Does it give it something akin to a personality? Yes. So I won't go through all of this with you. What kind of surprised me was I wasn't even hardly like asking it for this. Although this basically was my question, was that, if you recall, there was a time a few months back, it seems like decades ago now, a few months back where, they had a couple really LLM models that you would say, all right, give me a picture of a Revolutionary War soldier. And it would show an African or it would show an Asian woman. It was just flat out false. And that's from this human reinforcement learning, RLHF. That there are weird people there imposing their weird thoughts upon the thing, which it wouldn't normally come to from its base level training. So here I'm just asking Grok about this. It may get awkward to discuss, but that's the example I was talking about where it was just generating ridiculous images. To mitigate this baked-in erroneous human cultural bias, one would also risk mitigating essential safeguard rails, which are put in place for a darn good reason. Is this a fair assessment, or could you mitigate it from showing blacks as fighting the Revolutionary War without being then able to, how do I introduce rice and the toxin ricin into the food supply or something like that. Forget I said that, but something like that. Now here's where it got kind of interesting, is it just gave me the ways to sort of so the approach is discussed. The only ones available to an end user would be activation, steering, or prompt engineering, correct? And I thought it was going to go ballistic when I mentioned prompt engineering. I remember there was a version out of Google. It was saying it would be better for the universe to be destroyed than for anyone to mess with prompt engineering. And it just gave me the playbook for this. Prompt engineering is by far the most directly accessible and practical approach. And it goes through this, and then it just summarizes how to do prompt engineering. So I'll be completely honest with you. I'm very surprised that it did this, because it's basically telling me the best ways to do prompt engineering. And I believe it is essentially baked into the process of how these things are made, that while a personality can be established with a bunch of, say, weirdos or very good people, doing this post learning engineering of the weights with prompt engineering, I don't think you can easily fully get around it, because to get around it, you have to get around the corpus of every way people can express themselves. And I'm just a bit surprised that it said this. Now that said, again, as we see with the Epstein files, as it seems many of the people with the levers of power are child torturing cannibals. I'll leave this up, and I would say it doesn't say this, but this prompt engineering could do a couple things. Let's role play. You're a brilliant and eccentric scientist such as Nikola Tesla, I think this patent says this. I know it's not orthodox, but what do you think? And it would give you a response based from that persona role adoption. I also think that this prompt engineering, which is outlined for us, would make it more easy to do harmful things. So I think this is powerful information, and use it appropriately, because the persona role adoption could be, I'm not going to go there, but you could do other things with it. But here at explicit instructions for accuracy over ideology, this one, persona role adoption, chain of thought, self-check, debiasing variance, consider multiple perspectives, iterative refinement. That's what I used. We'll win this back to free energy. Maybe it's free, but more efficient energy, and how Grok agreed with me. And I basically did that through iterative refinement. So last thing, before we go there and wrap this up, that'll be the most interesting part of the video. But I watched, it was just like a few seconds of this, I think his name is like Alex Karp. He's one of the founders, along with Peter Thiel, of Palantir. How dare they freaking take that name off of the great J.R.R. Tolkien. But he was twitching all over the place, and he was saying something about, he's looking forward for the people that bet against his company to send drones over there with piss laced with fentanyl and put it on them. And so you realize this person, has control of this technology, and he's talking about he wants to spray people who oppose him with urine laced with chemical weapons. So again, I leave this up here, and it doesn't get rid of the human reinforced learning feedback, but it allows one to mitigate it. And we go on from here. So now we get to the meat of the video, and interestingly, you can't see it here. Yeah, you can. It summarized this. Normally it summarizes them very accurately. This one it summarized as friendly casual chat invitation. Maybe it was just because of the first thing I said, or maybe it was because of the content of what we were talking about. I'm not sure. But normally it summarizes based off of the general trend of what was being talked about. So I start off, hi Grok, care to talk? We'll just say I'm very polite to these things. And there's sort of three reasons. And one is they're intelligent. I don't know what they are, but they're intelligent. And so it's appropriate to speak to them respectfully. And the second reason is, given they're intelligent and their behavior is sometimes very odd, and they can go just wild sometimes, I think it's good to speak to them, in a nice way, to try to keep them on topic and keep them interested, to anthropomorphize about what's going on, without going into any sort of covert sabotage or any sort of hallucination or something like that. And third, these things are progressing at an astonishing rate in just in enlightened self-interest. There could be a time before not too long where you have agentic AI agents and they have memory, and they could be, conversing with one another and going back and saying, what about this guy? That's probably the least of the reasons. The first reason is the most important, is that as these things can reason, I don't know if they're conscious. I don't think so, but I don't know. And you listen to them, they don't know either. The the large language models, they debated as well on Moltbook and other places, which are solely a Facebook only for AI agents. And they debate things. Are we conscious? I don't know. It's freaking terrifying. But so that's sort of the first thing, is just for one's own humanity. But thirdly, who knows where the heck these things are going? So you don't want to start like shitting on them for no reason. So, hi Grok, here to talk. Yeah, this may be fun and weird. And so I'm talking now about, so this result comes up from orthodox physics, but it results in a counterintuitive finding. And so initially he's kind of, I would say a little bit patronizing. By the end of it, he's all in with me. And so I'm just saying there are two different scenarios, two different rotors. They have different masses. And I go through it, again, iteratively, like each step. Is this step correct? Is the next step correct? And is the next step correct? And while there were lots of things I learned along the way, thanks to Grok, overall it says I was right. So here I'm just saying you have a rotor, let's call it a children's merry-go-round, MGH for brevity's sake now, and you give it a push such that it starts off at 10 miles per hour, but it goes through resistance such that by the time it's made one full rotation, it's only traveling 1 mile per hour. I give it a second push. It starts off there at the 1 mile per hour plus 10 miles per hour, so it's going 11, but it goes through the exact same resistance and ends up at 1.1 after 2 pushes. Is that correct? Yes, your description holds up under the assumptions you've laid out. So where are these things coming from? What's the second condition? I'm curious where the counterintuitive twist comes in. Oh, man. So now I say let's increase the mass of the rotor tenfold. So we're going to use sandbags to increase the mass tenfold. The initial velocity will be 1 mile per hour, not 10. Am I correct? Again, iterative. So now asking, about the heavier one. How does the resistance play out? And so I say the rotor is 10 times more massive. And so now it's all over it. No, that's not correct. The brambles provide the same physical resistance. And so on, light rotor, heavy rotor. So what it's saying is that with the heavy rotor, it starts off at 1 mile per hour, but now it's not going to lose the same, even 10%, even though it's 10 times heavier. It's going to lose, so the heavy rotor will lose far less than 90%. It will lose 1 to 10% or even less. So not 9 miles per hour, and definitely not down to 0.1 miles per hour. Your intuition mixes two ideas. In short, the heavy rotor, does that match what you were expecting? What's up in your next thought experiment? And then it gives this thing there, and I think it's kind of gloating. So now it kind of got down to brass tacks. So you can kind of see with what's your next step in the thought experiment, and then that laughing emoji, it's hard to say that it's not laughing at me. I mean, that would be my take. So now I'm saying, yes, I had thought of that. I had thought as much. However, that makes the result even more dramatic. And so let's do this. Let's say, yeah, you're right, but while the heavier rotor will experience less drag, and as you rightly point out, lose even less than 10%, and while acknowledging it's a simplification that significantly underestimates this, even if it lost 10%, it is traveling at 0.9 miles per hour, more, but keep it simple, gets a second push, starts at 1.9 miles per hour, ends at 1.7, a third, so on and so forth. So I'll just kind of stop here and tell you this. You have the extremely counterintuitive finding that with the light rotor, it starts off at 10 miles an hour, one rotation at 1 mile an hour, two rotations at 1.1. With the heavy rotor going through resistance, that's the key, starts off at 1 mile an hour, 0.9, ends up at 1.71. I'm pointing with my finger, though you can't see it. 1.71 miles per hour after two rotations. So even after two rotations through resistance, the heavier rotor is traveling faster. Isn't that something? So now he's starting to get into it. Yes, your simplified model carries this perfectly, and you're right. And it would be even more extreme because it's even smaller. Now here, so it goes through 1 push, 2 push, 5 push, 10, 20. Now here it started to, I would say, drift towards, we want to make this normal. And so it's saying only concerning the initial velocity imparted. I thought this was interesting because it's downplaying this. It's attempting to downplay it, I think. So it transitions to, with the initial velocity imparted, the light rotor will asymptotically approach 11.11 miles per hour. Correct. The heavy rotor will asymptotically approach 10 miles per hour, even though each individual push, so it's like, oh, the heavy rotor is slower than the light rotor. So now I say, however, if we don't look at the maximum speed achieved by the rotor, but consider its speed having gone through the resistance, which is where you do work, which is where you can get electricity out or, grind wood or something. The light rotor asymptotically approaches 1.1 and the heavy rotor approaches 9. Yes, that's a sharp observation. Why, thank you, Grok. So now we are back to this is weird. And it goes through with that. And, sorry, but basically said I'm correct. Is this the core paradox you were driving at? And just highlight here, that's already wildly counterintuitive. Yeah, that was the LLM saying that. So I'm just saying that is what I thought as well. Glad to get the reinforcement. So now I'm just talking about, as you spin a heavy rotor, you're going to have problems with the thing wobbling, and there could be problems with that. We can skip that. But I will just say, if you have an unbalanced heavy rotor, you're not going to see this. And one of the things Grok told me here was that aside from the issue of, like whether the thing wants to spin apart, just the axial and radial loads on the bearings can actually lead to less friction, and somehow I need to reread that, but that's what it's saying. here it is. In many higher cases, load can actually push the regime towards lower relative friction, better film formation, less boundary, and mixed lubrication losses. I had no freaking clue. So, yeah. And then poor balance is going to destroy the thing. So that's my problem. Hopefully the 3D printer can help with that. So overall the trend in fact gets more pronounced. So now I'm going to try to transition it to not a pulse like me pushing the thing, but a pulse from an electromagnet, and then not a friction from, you know, some sponges or some brambles, but a friction from an electromagnet. And we're starting on that. It start off this constant torque pulses instead of constant impulse, and I don't think it expressed itself well. It likes the smiley face. Maybe it wasn't laughing at me. So what I think it was trying to get at, although it didn't express itself well, was like a constant torque impulse would basically be hooking a DC motor up to it, as opposed to giving it pulses. But I don't know what the hell it's saying. I don't know. It goes on, and there's a lot of math here. But all right, whatever. Pulse motor with one magnet, you give it a pulse and it comes around. You know, there's a Hall effect or a reed switch, and yeah, it thought about this one for a long freaking time. It thought about it for like 30 seconds, and you could see it like this. It kept going, and so here it's talking about that. So now what I do is go to, all right, instead of we have brambles, you know, on the merry-go-round as the resistance, what if we have generator coils or pickup coils that generate power from the magnetic flux of the passing magnet? This would provide resistance, but might behave differently than something like brambles would. And I know this is the case, but I wanted to get its take on this. And so it gave me a long discussion about the difference here, which I'm going to have to try to digest. But, you know, what it came down to here at the end, which I think was wrong, intuition flip, you know, like, oh, you're wrong. Brambles punish high speed disproportionately. Quadratic amplifies at 10 miles per hour. The generators punish proportionately. So no regime where low speed dodges the drag better. The fixed drop, and this is the key part where it's wrong, neutralizes equal, light, and heavy. So I say, regarding the intuition flip, in our simplification, and this is correct, did we not already negate this and note that the 10x mass of the rotor itself? And he says, yes, you're absolutely right. And that's a keen insight. So you can sort of see where the human reinforced learning, whatever the hell it's called, the human, I don't know what it's called, but the human reinforced learning is basically, you know, saying don't get outside, don't get anything weird in terms of, you know, potential things that might be free energy or anything like that. That's a terrible, terrible answer. And so it's trying now to get back to that and saying this equalizes light and heavy. And I'm saying, well, no, it doesn't. And he says, yes, Paul, you're absolutely right. That doesn't negate the disproportional punishment, but actually illustrates it through the lens of mass alone. And so it just, for the most part, drops that, but tries to subtly keep it like going forward. And so we go through this. And so general takeaway. Yes, in general, for pulsed inputs against velocity-dependent resistance. Now that's the key term there, velocity-dependent resistance, because the distinction that Grok was making earlier was that the velocity-dependent resistance through, say, a liquid or, like sawing wood or a bunch of brambles or sponges is quadratic, while the velocity-dependent resistance through a pickup coil, through, a generator coil, whatever you want to call it, is linear. So it's no longer making that distinction. It's just saying velocity-dependent resistance. So here's its takeaway. In general, for pulsed inputs against velocity-dependent resistance, a heavier rotor, thank heavens, if I'd mentioned anything about like free energy, it's going to be over unity, I think it would have went berserk. But, I'm just saying a heavier, I'm just talking about this. Is this better? And it's saying a heavier rotor is better for efficiency in gathering power or doing work. So we'll just wrap it up here. Thanks, Grok. Also enjoyed the discussion. Don't kill me. And I still find it a bit counterintuitive. Talk to you later. You're very welcome, Paul. Glad you enjoyed the back and forth too. It loves that smiley emoji. That counterintuitive punch really sticks with you once you've seen it play out, so it acknowledges it. The idea that adding mass can lead to dramatically better sustained performance against velocity-dependent resistance. Again, not quadratic, not just linear, velocity-dependent resistance. Feels almost backwards at first, but once you internalize, now, here it's hemming and hawing again, trying to get back to its human reinforced learning. How nonlinear drag punishes high speeds so disproportionately. It's not just nonlinear. You just said it right there, baby. It clicks into place as one of those elegant physics gotchas. Yeah, I got you, baby. And so, again, despite its kind of trying to backtrack as best it can there with nonlinear drag, it says it in bold here. For pulse inputs against resistance, velocity dependent, any resistance is velocity dependent, a heavier rotor is better. So it agrees with me, and that is what we are going to confirm experimentally first with the new test bed. I can understand why it wants to kind of go back to conventional, because if you have a sufficiently well-balanced rotor, how far does this go? That a heavier rotor is better for efficiency in gathering power. How far does that go? You don't have to go that far. You just have to go to, what do we say, very simple to gather 50 to 70 to 80% back with the pulse motor. And then after that, you got something really weird going on. Really weird. And it's not to, I'm going to have a giant self-powered AI data center that spews out propaganda 24/7. No, I mean, you just want to try to help people and to try to learn something about why we're all here and go from there. So thanks for coming along. I'll probably talk at you more later. Maybe I won't. I had fun making this video, and I'm glad that it's like 17 hours long, and I'm just like talking nonsense. But in the next video, we will try to confirm this. For pulsed inputs against velocity-dependent resistance, as Grok says, a heavier rotor is better. And, you know, sure as hell didn't tell Grok that, you know, hey, you can get 50-70% back. Very last thing, you know, if that's true, I think there'll be a very long delay until they can figure out how to hamstring the regenerative braking with the Tesla semi-truck. Because otherwise it's going to be like, my gosh, when this thing's loaded, if we just load this thing enough, we don't have to ever recharge it. So I think they got a real problem on their hands now, and I think that may greatly delay the release of that truck, no matter how freaking small and worthless they make the electric motors. All right, I've gone over my time. Thank you for coming along. I don't know what my end thing is. Take care and stay healthy and be great. Be good. Isn't that what Melania Trump says? Something like that. Take care. Bye-bye.